the first thing you can do is you can draw your circle on here, or if you happen to have your tape nearby, you can just use that as a template to get a nice circle onto your paper. The next one that we're going to do is we're going to work on our square over here. So I always just kind of sketch out my first square, try and get my size as close to equal as possible. I'm not too worried about it. Now here's the short and dirty way to do a cube when you're working on it. You can do another one that overlaps it, but you want to make sure the one that overlaps it is smaller than your first one. Why do you want to make sure it's smaller? Because it's further away. Those things get farther away from us. They get smaller. And then you can connect the corners. Then the next one that we're going to want to have on here is a cone. So you start with a triangle, but instead of being flat across the bottom, you want to round it out because our cones have those rounded bottoms on them. And then for our final one, we'll do a cylinder. So you need an ellipse on the top. All right, and it's going to come down on each side. And this curve here should match the same curve at the bottom as much as possible. Again, we're not going for perfection on these. We just want some general outlines that we can use while we're painting our... So when I'm working with these, I always want to work lightest to darkest. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of my yellow first. And I want to remember to leave some of my paper showing. I'm just going to add it to my paper and then only put water back on my brush to come back in and work that out towards the other areas where I'm going to end up with red. I also need to work it and fade it into the middle, so I'm going to rinse and just pick up some more water and just go around the edge with water. If it doesn't fade enough, I'm going to go just back in with that water brush again. And now I'm going to lift some of that out of there so that it doesn't overblend and create a hard line. Okay. Now I'm going to go back in with my core color and work in the red. I'm going to try and stay inside those lines, always pulling my brush, not pushing. Sometimes you pull sideways or at an angle or straight down, but you don't ever want to push the brush and end up splaying all of your bristles out. You'll lose your points on your brushes really quickly that way, and they don't always like to go back into points when you do that. So then I'm going to fill in the rest of that area, and you can see where it touches the yellow, it's already starting to naturally move over a little bit. And since technically my sphere is supposed to be red, I'm going to grab this line around the back and rinse this out with just some water and blend this area out. And I'm going to lift a little bit to make sure that the yellow still has the opportunity to stay on the paper and to not disappear. We don't want it to become absorbed into the red, and we also don't want to lose the yellow. So then I can go back in with a touch of yellow where those colors overlap and work them together a little bit more. And a lot of watercolors working back and forth when you're trying to navigate these different ways. You can also wait for layers to dry and go back in and add more later. I'm going to pick up some of my ultramarine, start adding in my core shadow, and you always remember you want to leave a little gap in there for the reflective light. If you forget, you can always use the lifting technique, and you can go back in and push as well by adding more of the paint of the color you want to have show up. See how that pushes this way far out? A little more than I wanted, so I'm going to go back in with more color. Again, working back and forth as necessary. Adding color, taking color out, pushing color in. That's how a lot of this works. Again, this is the way you have to go through and work on it though if you are not allowing layers to dry. If you allow layers to dry, then you can go back in and paint on top of layers. get a little bit smoother transition when you're working on things. Okay. And then don't forget, you're also going to want your cast shadow on the opposite side. And I'm going to leave a super thin gap because, you know, if we touch the wet on wet, it's just going to want to bleed back up and into that sphere. So you want to be careful with that. Kind of like that. And we can work over on our cube. If the light was shining on our cube the same way, coming from that same upper right hand corner and down, we're going to want our lightest side of this cube to be the top face, and then a medium and a darker, because it's not going to be over here on this side. So I'm going to paint a mess of things. So I'm just going to let that dry while I work on some other areas. I'm going to come down here to my cone. A lot over on this side where I really want it to be lighter. So I'm going to go in with just water, but then wipe it down and lift some of that out. So I'm lifting and pushing at the same time while I'm working on this side. I can always directionalize it a little bit more. Like that. Make sure you don't lose your edges. Okay. Then I can go back in with some darker blue on that back side. And if I wanted to even throw a little bit of purple in there, go back in with that red and drag that in. So I get a purple color. I'm letting my edge get a little big down here. I have to be careful about that. My shadow edge in. Go back in with some more of that ultramarine. Keep working. There's a little bit of a reflection side on this side as well. And we could say it's going to be the lightest of the bunch. And if we have that light, again, coming down in this way, the top of it is going to be the lightest part. So I'm going to add in my yellows. And it really doesn't matter if you do this vertically or horizontally while you're filling it in, as long as you're getting it nice and smooth while you're working across. And then I'm just going to pull with water. Again, we want it to be getting lighter and lighter. So the way we do that with watercolors is we pull or we push with just water to make the paint pigments move around where we want them. Then we want to do our darker edge back here. So I'm going to add a little bit of red and bring that across. I'm not adding any more to my brush. I'm just gently working sideways to pull that color over. If it's not enough, go back and pick up a little more and add some more red in. If I want a real hard line across the bottom, I take a lot of the water off and then I just go back in. I can add that line. We're going to have that cast shadow is going to come off of there. I'm going to drop it along that edge. I want to be careful I don't drop it too close to where it's still wet. So I'm being very gentle with this. I'm dragging out and away as much as I can on that edge. We're going to let that dry for a little bit. I think I can go ahead at this point in time and use my blow dryer. If you don't have a blow dryer at home, you can let this sit for about 10 minutes or so and then come back to it and work on it some more. So after you've let this dry for a bit, or you used a hair dryer on it, you can go back in and you can work on it a little bit more. I'm going to start with my yellow up here on my cube and go back in. Remember, our light's reflecting off of the top surface the most, so that's the one I'm going to go back in and add the yellow to. Rinse out my brush, grab a little bit of the green. I'm going to drop some of that green in, not a whole lot. Rinse my brush, dry it, and I'm going to pull that and mix it into the yellow, and that gives us a lighter surface on the top, showing that the light is reflecting. I'm going to let that dry before I add my blue. And come back down here, and I'm going to put in my cast shadow off of my cone. And we ended with a purple last time, so we still want to end with that purple edge this time, which means I'm going to have to grab a little bit of yellow in there and mix that in as well. Sorry, I said yellow, I meant red. I'm even looking at it. It's kind of one of those days today. And if it has more red than it does have blue, then I can just go back in and grab more blue and drop it on top and blend it out. Okay. So looking for something along that lines. If I even want to go back, like I said, you could go back once it's dry a little bit and add some more in. You're welcome to do so. Just make sure your brush isn't too wet that you start lifting a whole bunch and pushing too much when you're working in there. I think I want to solidify this edge a little bit more with that red. So I'm going to go back in while it's dry and add in just a little bit more red. Really make it harder. Dry the brush and then work it into the existing. It's already there. Very gently and smoothly. And for the top of this one, we're going to use yellow, but we don't need a whole lot of yellow since it's our most reflective surface. Just throw a little yellow on there and go back in with just water. I'm going to lift a little out. It's more than I wanted. And I want to give it a little bit of value and lighten it up on this side, but leave it darker on the back side, almost like there's a little lip back there. There we go. And if you really wanted to define that edge a little more, you could go on with just a touch of the red and a really small brush tip to blend it out like that. So I can go back in now with the blue, just on this side. Don't want to do it on the other side. I'm going to try and paint as straight up and down as I can. It's always interesting doing it at an angle to stay out of the camera as well while you're painting at the same time. And this is a larger area, so I am going to grab a bit of a larger brush, but it's still not dark enough, so I'm going to go back in and pull some more colors down. And that's just adding color in and pulling down with my brush. Sort of like that. And my surface is getting a little buckled, so some of these colors may settle into those lower lying areas than others, giving it a bit of a different look. And if I want to lift just a little on this edge to make that cast shadow show up better, I can go in and take out a little bit of the wet paint, just so it defines the edge against the cast shadow a